Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Desk Gaming and a new video on the channel with my 10 tips for speeding up your League Start campaign. These are in no particular order, but I think they're all very useful. And before we jump into the 10 tips, I just want to say that rushing is not necessarily the best thing. If you have a build that doesn't need a lot of help with gear, then obviously the quicker you get to maps and the quicker you get through maps, the sooner you're going to be earning more currency. If, however, you're running a build that actually needs some decent gear to feel good in maps or mid-tier maps, you don't really want to focus all your time on being quick because you might get to a point where you're stuck for upgrades, you're ready to progress your maps, but you don't actually have the gear and character that's capable of doing it. So you then have to drop back to lower content and farm that for hours. So take these tips into account, but speed is not everything. So number one, which I think is the most important, is know the build that you're playing. So know the gems and where you need to buy them in the first few acts. And if you can, the skill tree. I'm not saying you have to learn the entire skill tree in every gem link in the build, but knowing what gems and sockets you need in Act 1, for example, and knowing the first 20 to 30 points on your tree can save you an absolutely huge amount of time, especially if you're someone that checks a POB every time they hit a level up or every time they get to a vendor to get a reward, they check to see if they need a particular gem. These things are not too hard to memorize, and it's something that I recommend because it will shave a lot of time off the first few acts. Number two, if you're someone who's seriously wanting to shave time off and you play a lot, then I would practice acts 1 to 3. You don't have to do it a lot of times. Just take these tips into account, give acts 1 to 3 a bit of practice, and see how it improves your time. When I first started playing this game and I wanted to speed up, I was a very slow player by nature. I maybe took an hour an act. I was maybe like 10 to 12 hours to get through the campaign. And just in 2 practice runs, I got my time from Act 1 down from 50 minutes down to about 35 to 40. And then just with a couple more runs, I got it down to around 30 to 35 minutes each time. And I managed to get my campaign down to pretty consistently 5 hours a time, where maybe 7 to 8 leagues ago, I was 10 to 12 hours. It actually becomes enjoyable and rewarding to shave lots of time off your playthrough. Now, this is obviously optional, but if you're someone who's played for a while and wants to improve and doesn't find they ever get any quicker, then practicing is probably the one thing you need to do. This is not really a tip for new players. You don't want to go practicing if you've hardly played the campaign. Just get stuck in and enjoy it. Number 3, use a decent loot filter and a regex for vendors. So obviously make sure you've got a good loot filter that cuts out stuff that's no good for your build and highlights key items such as the correct socket combos and weapons, because it might save you time having to check vendors. So while we're on the subject of vendors, a regex is basically a string of text that looks for specific things when you paste it into the vendor window. So I'll have loads and loads of different text that looks like mumbo jumbo, but what it does, it'll only highlight specific things that you're asking it for. So in Act 1 and 2, I asked the regex to look for 3 green link sockets, green, green, red, green, green, and movement speed boots. I paste that regex into the vendors and it just highlights the items I need. It saves a lot of time in Act 1 and 2. Number 4, go for DPS over life early on. You really don't need more than 1k to 1.2k life going into Act 6 or 7, so prioritize DPS over life in the first few acts. You can always pick up more life nodes later on. Early on, killing things quickly is a very, very good way of speeding up your playthrough. If you're killing bosses 3 times as quick and you one-shot in packs, you're going to improve your time massively. And also, even though life helps with survivability, killing monsters quicker helps more. The quicker you kill the monsters, the less dangerous they're going to be. Number 5, stop picking up every item. This is one thing that can add a ton of time to your playthrough. If you just pick up every rare to sell to the vendor for scraps, or you're already geared with gear good enough to get you through the campaign zones that you're in, but you're picking up an ID in every item to try and find an improvement. Just bear in mind these items in 2 to 3 at a time may be irrelevant. So if your build is working, don't pick anything up unless you need the currency. If you're short on transmutes or alterations, by all means, obviously pick the items up and sell them to make sure you've got some currency. But if you're sitting with 15 to 20 transmutes in your stash, you do not need to be picking up rares and selling them. Number 6, movement speed is king. Always, always, always take a second Quicksilver Flask from the Den quest in Act 2, unless you've already picked a second one up. And just get used to alternating between the 2 flasks, so try and keep them up as close to 100% as you can. Make movement speed boots a priority. Always search for these at vendors, and if you have an open prefix and your boots don't have movement speed, once you pick up the craft in Act 2, make sure your boots have always got movement speed on them. Number 7, stop killing every monster. There's no need to kill every monster in the game. What I tend to do is look for magic packs to kill and white mobs to kill who happen to be between me and the exit to the zone. If a rare is going to take more than a few seconds to kill, leave it and move on. They give more XP, but if it takes 10 times longer to kill it, it is not worth it. Most of the time, they drop 0 rewards. The easiest way to look at this is try to stay below the level of the zone that you're in. If you end up being over the level of the zone that you're in, just stop killing stuff completely and just run through the zone. Maybe stop every now and again to refill your Quicksilver flask and then let the zones catch up with your level. And number 8 is stop going back to town. Once your gear's sorted and you've got your gem links, you really do not need to go back to town at all, maybe once per act to collect all of your skill points in bulk. There are not many quests in the game where you actually have to go to town. There's 3 or 4 quests where you have to collect something from town to progress the story, but every other campaign you can complete without activating it at the NPC. You just complete it, go to the NPC, the quest will activate, you turn it in. When I applied this to my Act 5 to 10 part of the game, I was shaving 5 to 10 minutes off of each zone just by not going back. And then when you get to the last waypoint in the zone, you go back, collect your skill points, gear, gems, maybe spend a minute just sorting through to see if you've had anything good, and then you move on, and it saves a lot of time. Number 9, this might be controversial, but don't waste time getting resistance cap. If you're over 50%, to me, that's good enough. I don't notice that I'm getting absolutely obliterated. It's very nice to be resistance capped. But if you're above 50%, you don't have any open suffixes on your gear, there's nowhere to go on the tree, then don't go farming gear just to get resistances. Just keep moving through the campaign. At some point, you're going to get the gear drop that you need. If you're absolutely desperate, you can always put Purity of Elements on just to get a temporary buff to your resistances, makes your ailment immune. You're probably going to drop damage because it might mean dropping a 50% damage aura, but it's better than wasting loads of time farming gear. All I do is make sure that when I'm ready to move to maps, that's when I'm capped, and once I lose my 30% resistances, I'm there or thereabouts capped for maps. But again, if I'm 60% plus, I'm fine with that. I know I'm going to get gear in the first few maps that can balance those resistances off. And the last one is don't do side quests that don't offer a skill book. There's lots of quests in the game that just offer respec books. A lot of them are really out of the way to get to. It might add 5 to 10 minutes onto your act to complete this quest. You don't need to do it during the campaign. So we have a bonus tip, number 11, because I can't believe I left this out. Use your crafting bench. Now, most people know that when you're leveling up, if you've got an open suffix, you can craft up to 20% resistances for a transmute on the crafting bench. But you get some really, really good crafts unlocked that have nothing to do with resistances. So an example I'm going to give is I am looking at a Rain of Arrows build for 322. So in Act 3, you pick up the fire damage craft. This is absolutely huge, and some people just forget to craft anything other than resistances. So for 4 transmutes, we can craft 21 to 41 fire damage onto a weapon. This doesn't seem that big because people just think about endgame numbers where you've got hundreds of damage on your bow. But this is equivalent to a flat added cold gem at that stage. So just crafting this onto your bow can take you from a 4 link to a pseudo 5 link, and the damage makes a massive difference. You could be looking at 10 to 15% more DPS by crafting this flat elemental damage onto your weapon. This is just one example of a craft that can really, really boost your damage early on. This 10 to 14% movement speed you pick up at the end of Act 2. If you've picked up 3 orbs of augmentation and you don't yet have movement speed, you can go and craft movement speed on boots to improve your clear speed through the campaign. This is something you can consistently craft on boots. If you find a really good pair of boots, but with an open prefix and no movement speed, pick them up, go to your crafting bench, craft the movement speed. If you're not in SSF, I would definitely not do any of the other crafts because they cost chaos, and for that chaos you could probably buy a better pair of boots with the same or better movement speed. So if you're someone that takes, let's say 7+ hours to get through the campaign, and you don't really take on board any of these tips so far, what's the best thing to do to speed up your progress instantly? Because doing all 10 things might be very difficult to follow, and it might be something that you can't grasp all at once. I think the best things to break are habits. So even though I think knowing your gem links and your skill tree in Act 1 is massively beneficial and can cut the time in half, that's something that you will just do by memorizing it. The things that are going to save you the most amount of time are breaking the things that you do by force of habit. These are the 3 things I will concentrate on. 1, do not go back to town every time you've killed an enemy that gives you a skill point. That one skill point is very likely to make any difference whatsoever. If there's another 3 quests later on that give you more skill points, again, don't go back to town. Wait until the very end of the act, go back, collect all your skill points at once, and then put them all into your tree together. Be conscious of your level. If you can see that you are catching up or very close to or even over the level of your zone, stop killing monsters. They serve no purpose whatsoever. They're not going to give you any loot. You don't need the XP. Just use the kills for quicksilver charges and move on. And then lastly, stop picking up items. This is quite a hard habit to break because early on you naturally pick up rare items to sell for transmute shards or ID them and sell them for alteration shards. Later on, you tend to not notice how many you've got and you're still picking these up. You then get full, you have to teleport back to town to go to a vendor or you waypoint back, you sell the items. Then, just because you're there, you check your gear, you look at your resistances, you look at could you improve items. Don't do any of that. Unless your build is starting to fail, you don't need to upgrade your gear. If you can do these 3 things alone as your first implementation, I guarantee if you're someone that takes 8 to 10 hours to do the campaign, you will shave at least an hour, possibly 2, off of your campaign just by doing these 3 things. Now, there's obviously tons of tips for people who want to level quicker at League Start, but I thought I don't want to make this a super long video, so just picking out the 10 tips that help me the best, I thought would be most helpful. That's it for this video. There should be plenty more content coming out before League launch. Hope these sort of videos are helpful. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.